Welcome back. The interest rate will remain the same at 6.75%, and Reserve Bank Governor Lesteja Kganyago announced this decision this afternoon.
The overall risks to the inflation outlook are assessed to be moderately on the upside. The risks include administered prices such as electricity and water tariffs, rising domestic food prices in the outer years, changing investor sentiment towards emerging markets, moderation in global growth, and volatile international oil prices. Against this backdrop, the MPC unanimously decided to keep the repurchase rate unchanged at 6.75%. The committee continues to assess the stance of monetary policy to be broadly accommodative. Monetary policy actions will continue to focus on anchoring expectations closer to the midpoint of the inflation target in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth.
For more analysis of the decision, we have the Maudi Lentsoane, who is Managing Director of Lehumo Investments. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Well, at the beginning, there was consensus by analysts that there wasn't going to be change in the interest rate. So that has happened. Well, what do you make up of this economic setup for just an ordinary South African?
Look, we have an economy that is emerging out of a recession that we had last year. And of course, this is now, it requires really a stimulation from all fronts, from the physical side and also from a monetary monetary stimulus, which is why this decision to leave it unchanged was largely expected. I think it's in line with what the rest of the world is also doing. The Reserve Bank did make mention of the fact that they see the global GDP becoming a little bit sluggish into the final months of 2019. So therefore, it was a unanimous decision, even from the Reserve Bank's perspective, and not surprising at all, given the fact that we've got an economy that is just not shooting the lights, and the one that needs to really be stimulated from all the fronts in order for us to do well.
And it's also threatened by for example, Eskom is applying for an increase in the electricity tariffs.
Yeah.
And the implications of that are that, this could really have a devastating effect on not only the consumer, but also on the consumption of business as well.
Yeah, and obviously if approved, those tariffs, and it looks very much likely that we are going to get those tariffs, approved, even though they might not get what they are requesting, because it's extremely high. But they will get some sort of an increase, and that will have obviously an impact on administered prices, and it will have a negative impact on inflation. So, which is why the Reserve Bank or the governor was very clear in saying he's not ruling out the 25 basis point. Currently, they are pricing in a 25 basis point rate increase in this year. So, it's an improvement if you look at the fact that in November they were pricing in for this year 4 interest rate increases. So that has gone down because we've had a number of other factors which have really improved. You've got the stronger rand. You've also got the oil price, which has fallen from the recent highs in October. So there is some improvement in certain areas, but there's certainly pressure coming from other areas as well.
So when you look at the the midpoint of the inflation target range at 4.5%,
yeah.
Should we be really concerned when it's there at the moment?
Not necessarily. I think, it will remain within the target range for a long time. And this was acknowledged by the governor this afternoon. And so therefore, it's not a matter of, should we worry about the midpoint. The fact of the matter is, I think inflation will remain within this target band, especially if we don't get a growth, if we don't move into a growth projection within a short period of time. There are a number of factors. I mean, inflation will be driven by growth. If there's no growth, you're not going to see a much pressure in terms of inflation, unless we see some negatives coming from the oil price, for example, or the excessive weakening of the rand. In the absence of those two factors, I think the inflation will remain within the target range.
Now, the revision of the growth rate of the South African economy, what do you make out of these figures? At some point, we were at 1.8, and then it's 1.3, and then there was a time when they were talking about a 0.8% growth rate.
Yeah, so the South African Reserve Bank have revised it to 1.7. They are still projecting growth of higher than most of the people. For example, if you take the World Bank, the World Bank has got the projection for 2019 at 1.3, and Moody's as well. They revised it down to 1.3. It's much better compared to last year, and I'm hoping that this will be the last revisions we see, because if you recall, last year we had more than one revision, in fact more than two revisions. I think it was revised downwards 3 times. So if we get these being the final revision, I think it should be all right.
Yeah, we should learn a very good lesson from what we were talking about last year. This time you and I in the studio before the first quarter ended, and you remember what happened to the GDP then.
That's it.
But just lastly, when we look at the exogenous factors, what do you make out of the imminent fragile Brexit deal, the trade wars, and also the stance of the Fed Reserve, the possibility of increasing interest rates?
Yeah, so I mean, starting with Brexit, it creates a lot of uncertainty, no doubt, and especially for emerging market countries, where we already looked at in a very negative light. So if there's any risk elements that are coming from those worlds, will certainly impact very negatively. We trade, Europe is our largest trading partner, including the UK, and therefore any uncertainty that develops from there will certainly have a negative impact. The Fed, they've confirmed that they are going to be gradual in terms of their interest rates hike. So I'm not worried about that, and which is why we've seen the dollar weaken. And as a result, the rand trading around 13.75 cents, which is where it's hovering around at the moment. So I'm not so worried about the Fed. I think the situation there will be contained. I'm worried about China. I'm worried about Europe. That certainty, it's something that is unknown. We are in uncharted territories in Europe in terms of the UK and Brexit. And therefore, that's what's really, really worrying. And of course, the trade war as well. We would like to see a resolution there. I know that they've got until March to resolve everything. So a resolution there, which is positive, will definitely be positive for the global GDP.
Okay, I think the issues that you have been talking about, we will need more time to talk about them in not so distant future. But for now, thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.
All right. That's Maudi Lentsoane, who is Managing Director of Lehumo Investments. We're going to look at other news that have been happening.